So it's viewers' question time again today. I've had several viewers ask me my thoughts about hybrids. So today I want to cover that off in this video. So the place to start with hybrids is probably to talk about the three different types, because that has some relevance to the conversation. Three different types. There's a mild hybrid. A mild hybrid cannot be recharged at all, and it can't be driven solely on electric mode. So whilst it has a very small battery, it's really just to make it a bit more efficient. A full hybrid cannot be recharged from an external source, but it can be driven in electric only mode. And the Prius is a really good example of that. The final type, which is a slightly more modern type, is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, a PHEV. So that can be plugged into an external power source, and it can be used in electric only mode. And the range of a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle in electric only mode is usually sort of 20 to 45 or maybe 50 miles, something like that. So, are hybrids any good? Well, so the mild and full hybrid, they can reduce your CO2 emissions, and that's a good thing, but only to some extent. There's only a limited benefit that can be gained there. The Prius has done a good job of helping us reduce CO2 emissions for a number of years. It came out in the late 90s, I think, didn't it, the Prius, and has done very well since then. What I would say though, by using either a mild or a full hybrid, you're not learning anything about charging, so you're not learning anything new really. You're just using a car in a very similar way that you would have done before. And neither type of hybrid there can reduce their CO2 emissions at all over time. As they come out of the factory, that's the CO2 emissions you're going to get, and you can never reduce that any further. So a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, well, could that be a gateway drug to a full EV? Maybe. I think that's how some people tend to think of them. Certainly that's what one of my neighbours did. They had a plug-in hybrid, and they said, when I spoke to them, that they used it mostly in electric only mode, but for those long journeys they had the petrol engine to fall back on. With a PHEV, you are learning a little bit about charging. You're going to be plugging it in every once in a while. And you can also further reduce your CO2 emission over the lifetime of the car as the grid is decarbonised, because some of your driving range is coming from that electric charge. And as the grid decarbonises, then the CO2 emissions from doing so is going to reduce over time, which I think is a good idea. I do have somewhat mixed thoughts about PHEVs. There is a study in the US that shows that quite a number of PHEVs have never been plugged in. I think that is probably limited to the US in the sense that there's an incentive that you get for buying a plug-in hybrid, and I think it's a bit like a tax dodge in a way, that people are buying plug-in hybrids but they're not really using them like that. And of course that's kind of not great in the sense that you're carrying all the weight of all that extra kit that you're then not using, so your CO2 emissions are far higher than they were intended to be, and that's not a great thing. PHEVs tend to rarely have DC rapid charging. There are some that do, but not all of them do. They have quite a small battery usually, and there's a limited amount, there's a limited speed to how quickly you can get the energy in. So you can be limited to AC charging on some of them, which might be a bit of a shame. I have a slight concern that a PHEV that people see as a gateway to getting a full EV if they like it, they might be disappointed by it. They might find it a poor EV in the sense that they're tethered quite closely to charge points because of the very limited range that it offers. And of course you still have to refuel. So after a while it might seem like you're not really enjoying the fact that it's an EV. And I don't know how well they drive, to be honest. I don't know whether they drive as well as an EV will drive. So I do worry a bit that a plug-in hybrid might become a bit of a disappointment and people might become disillusioned rather than appreciating the electric and then moving to a full electric. It's also interesting that plug-in hybrids have to use the fuel every once in a while. If you leave fuel sitting for many, many months, it's a long time, but if you leave it sitting for a very long time, then it degrades a bit. And so a plug-in hybrid will run its engine even if you want to use it in electric only mode, just every once in a while, just to make sure that some of the fuel is being used. But I don't think it happens very often. Some of the downsides to having a hybrid, I think, is that you still got to do all the servicing on the internal combustion engine. So you've still got oil filter, air filter, fuel filter, and spark plugs that are going to need changing. Not all the time, but they do need changing because they're consumables that need to be, you need to keep up with. Carbon dioxide and the oxides of nitrogen, nitrogen dioxide for example, are still issues of course because there's still that internal combustion engine and there's a limited amount that you can do about that if you're going to be doing the distance beyond which the electric only mode will get you. You also have two drivetrains of course as well, so that's a bit more complexity and a bit more weight in the car. Although having said that, they probably won't be as heavy as a BEV in the sense that the battery that they have is quite small and therefore not as heavy. I think some people have said that there's less space in a plug-in hybrid than with a battery electric, and the reason is of course you've got all the standard internal combustion engine gubbins under the bonnet, and they've also got to find extra space for the battery and for the electric motor and that part of the drivetrain. So they can be a bit compromised in terms of space, but not dreadfully much, I wouldn't think. But certainly a battery electric car can be built, if it's built from the ground up, it can be built in a way which gives you more internal space than you would expect for the external size. It's a shame that, of course, on long journeys you're going to be using the internal combustion engine, and that's one of the modes in which it's not going to be very much fun to have the noise in the cabin of the internal combustion engine. That's a period during which it would be nice for the car to be nice and quiet, and of course that's the one period it can't be because it's got to use the internal combustion engine. Although of course they are pretty good in the sense that they have a fair amount of sound deadening usually, so it's not like it's screaming away at you, but it is more noisy than a BEV, which I think is a shame. You also get fewer tax breaks of course with hybrids. There aren't all that many tax breaks with EVs anymore anyway, but you do get a slight reduction in the road tax for a hybrid, and there is less benefit in kind tax for a plug-in hybrid, but it's about halfway between a regular internal combustion engine car and a BEV, I think. But you don't get zero road tax like you do on a BEV, although that only counts until 2025 when that rule changes. So would I buy a hybrid? Well, I have a Zoe, so I guess we know the answer is no. I didn't. I feel that battery electric vehicles offer a better pathway to the future, really. What's great about a BEV is that the CO2 emissions can continue to decrease over the life of the car. The cleaner the energy that's fed into it, the electricity mix can be, then the less CO2 emissions you're going to get from the car. So it's going to continue to improve over its life, which is great. I also appreciate that I have a reduced reliance on the fuel supply chain, which is a surprisingly complicated supply chain. The only thing I've ever had to queue for in my life due to shortages was petrol, and that's happened a couple of times. One of them was very bad. It was several weeks, if not a month, of people on strike, I think. People driving tankers were on strike. That was quite a long time ago. But it was noticeable how people started worrying about, stealing fuel being stolen out of your car and all sorts of things just because the fuel was missing for quite a long time. Now, as I say, that's an extreme. That's not going to happen all the time. But of course it did happen in COVID. That in that particular instance, it seems to have been largely panic buying that caused the problem. And just by trying to calm people down, the problem went away again. Although it was due to driver shortage. I think in that case, particularly in the UK where it happened, that was more to do with a sort of hangover of Brexit than anything else, where we had fewer drivers available, although people are moving out of long distance driving anyway, I think, to some extent. I think there is a limited use case for plug-in hybrids into the future. I think if you do extremely regular, very long distance commutes or driving, then a plug-in hybrid might be slightly more convenient for you. I did meet a guy here while I was recording the other day who says that he drives to see his parents in the north of Scotland, really a long way from here, probably 600 miles or more, and that would be slightly less convenient in a battery electric. So I asked him how often he stops on that drive, and he says, well, these days usually he will stop once, and in a battery electric vehicle you probably need to stop twice in that distance, I would say, probably, for most BEVs. I mean, there are a couple that might make it that far with just one stop, but I think that would be rare. Now, these long distance regular long drives can be done in a BEV. It's just a question of whether they might be slightly less convenient, because you may need to stop for 20 minutes or so to do a top up, maybe once or possibly twice. And it's only slightly inconvenient, but I understand that it might be. So I can see that people might think that a plug-in hybrid is a safe bet. You know, you've got the electric range for all the local commutes where you're not producing any local pollution, and then you can fall back to using fuel for the long distance stuff, and I do see that, but I wonder if it is as safe as people imagine. Let's think into the future about what might happen. Let's say in 5 years' time there are half the number of cars using fuel, and I think that is a possibility. That will certainly happen at some point. So what that will do is that will cause a lot of fuel stations to close, because there's not a lot of profit in selling fuel, and if there's less custom, they're not going to be able to stay open, all of them. So there will be fewer of them. So that means it might be slightly less convenient to fill up with fuel, because you may have to go further if the ones closest to you have closed. So that might be a bit inconvenient. I also wonder whether fuel prices will be affected by the reduction in use of fuel, whether we'll see a sort of reversal in the economies of scale of the amount of fuel that is produced at the moment. Now, I don't know that, but I do wonder whether that will be the case at some point. The other thing I wonder about is resale values. I'm not sure that will happen, but surely at some point there will be an oversupply of internal combustion engine cars that people don't want. And that does suggest that they won't hold their value at that point. So you might have bought something, particularly if you bought something quite expensive, that suddenly has much less value. And so whilst I think there is a danger to switching too early, there is also a danger to switching too late. Now, when will that be? That's the difficult thing, is trying to work out when that too late is, because you don't want to be caught up in that. I don't know when that will be. I did make a prediction a year or two ago saying that it would happen very quickly, and I soon realised that was quite silly. It wasn't going to happen as fast as I thought. But I think what will happen is that it would kick in quite suddenly. You would suddenly notice that things were just a bit less convenient, and the price of internal combustion engine cars was dropping quite quickly, because, you know, everyone will sort of catch on, and there'll be this roller coaster, this self-reinforcing thing of people worrying about it. And so that could happen quite quickly when it does happen. Okay, so it's game time. I want you guys to play along at home. What I want you to do is to think the other way around. Rather than think, should I have a hybrid? What I want you to do is think, why can't you have an EV? What I want you to do is write down why an EV is a problem for you, all the things that you can think of. But try to drill down to the root cause. Don't list 10 things that are actually all the same thing. Try to drill down to the root cause of what it is that's bothering you. include all the trips in the last 12 months that couldn't be done in an EV. Why don't you do that now? Pause the video and come back in a second. Okay, all done? Good. Now, I think the two things that are going to be on that list basically boil down to range and cost. We'll come back to those in a minute. If you've got any others besides those two, then I suggest what you do is you put them in the comments below this video. I can't think of many other things that are going to be valid anymore with EVs. They may have been valid in the past, but they probably aren't now. So pop down in the comments and let's discuss any of the others you've come up with that aren't those two. So range. You've got a list of all the journeys you did in the last 12 months which you think might have been a problem with an EV. So I want you to go down that list and I want you to cross everything off that is less than 200 miles. It is easy now to get an EV that will do 200 miles. So you won't even need to charge en route if the journey was less than 200 miles. Now there are still some that will do less than that, but there are some that will easily do 200 miles, and indeed there are some that will do 250. So I think we should just cross those off as not being very relevant. Now what I also want you to do is to go down the list and work out if there were any where, even though it was over 200 miles, you stopped at less than 200 miles for a break or for a toilet break or to have a rest or something like that. Because if you're already stopping, then plugging the car into charge, as long as you stop somewhere where there is a charger, is not a big deal. There are EVs now that will charge in 20 minutes, 10 to 80%, and so the stop is not very long for recharge en route. There are some, to be fair, that take longer, 40 to 45 minutes, and Zoe is one of the slowest there is in terms of DC rapid charging, because she takes about 50-55 minutes to do 10 to 80%. But other than that, you should cross all of those others off. So the question is, how many journeys are there left? And my guess is there probably aren't all that many. If there are a lot, then certainly it's going to be a bit more difficult for you. And one of the best options for you would be to have a look at a Tesla. Teslas have the best charging network by quite a long way. And so for really regular long distance stuff, having a Tesla just makes life a lot easier. Much more reliable network, very rapid charging, really good range. So let's think about cost next. So cost is a valid problem. Buying an EV up front is more expensive. However, there are some things you can do, and I'm not going to cover them in this video because I think that's a standalone video that will follow up very shortly. I'm trying to keep these videos bite-sized, so I'm not going to talk all that much about cost, but I think we might be able to get around that for some of you. So really, my recommendation to you is to challenge your assumptions and try an EV. And I don't mean buy one. I'm talking about giving one a bit of a go. Now that you've got that list, you can use the contents of that list to inform your experiment. Try checking out the things that you think are a problem and see whether they really are. I'm going to do again a separate video about how to do a test of an EV, what options are available to you in terms of doing that. Again, that's a standalone video, nice and bite-sized, but it will be following this one immediately because I think that's an important part of this discussion. The other thing I would suggest is that you might be able to simplify your search. One of the few things you've probably still got on that list of journeys which you think you can't do in an EV is your annual holiday, where you've driven a very long time, particularly if you've driven to Europe. Now even that would be possible, but I kind of get that. So rather than think about buying a car for absolutely everything, what if I could get you a car which would save you enough money that you could hire a car for your annual holiday. And I think that's really worth considering, because think how differently you would be able to consider buying a car if you didn't have to think about the once a year holiday where you needed to fit absolutely everything in. I think if you did that and you saved up the money to hire the car and then got the EV, you would find that you may not even need to hire it, because once you've got more confident with it, you probably understand that you could probably do it in the EV anyway. But having that money ready to do that hire is a sensible fallback position. Okay, well that's it for this video. As usual, your comments and feedback are most welcome. Pop down in the comments section, give me any thoughts or any questions you have. And certainly let's discuss things that were on your list that I didn't cover at the end of the video. If you've enjoyed the video, then please consider liking it by clicking the thumbs up button. That helps YouTube understand that it might be valuable and to promote it to other people. And certainly subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks.